We are halfway through the 2026 MotoGP season, and what a classic campaign we are having. We've had twists, we've had turns, we've had 6 different winners and all sorts of championship contenders. Jack, this is the season that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. MotoGP, the most exciting sport on earth for a reason. We came into this new campaign with Marc Marquez, the red hot favourite, understandably, as he went for an 8th world crown in the Premier class. But we thought that there were going to be 3 key contenders. Alex Marquez hoping to go one better than last year. Pecco Bagnaia, who'd shown signs throughout pre-season that championship winning form was back. And Marco Bezzecchi and Aprilia finished 2025 so strong. What were they able to do? What was to unfold? I think nobody could have predicted in their wildest dreams.
Non-stop headlines on and off the track. Tough to pick the bones out of it all, but we're going to have a good go. This is After the Flag. Well, when Marco Bezzecchi ended 2025 with back-to-back victories, having led every lap, I guess hopes were high at Nuale that they could well take the fight to Ducati in 2026. That's exactly how the first part of the season panned out from an Aprilia point of view, and it felt from the very first Grand Prix lap of the season, Jack, when Aprilia were 1, 2 and 3 with Bezzecchi, Martin and Ralph Fernandez. It felt like the Nuale brand were really making a serious early statement of intent.
Yeah, they absolutely were. We went through pre-season testing with Aprilia keeping their cards close to their chest, not wanting to let any of their rivals or us in the media know just how much of a step they've been able to make on that RSGP. We already knew it was a good motorcycle, as you say. Marco Bezzecchi winning lights to flag races in the penultimate 2 rounds of the year, and then he just kicked on at the start of 2026 to the surprise of everybody. You mentioned that opening session of the year. Marco Bezzecchi in that opening session of the year went under Marc Marquez's previous lap record around the Chang International Circuit on every single lap he did. That was a warning shot and told us all what was to come in those opening few rounds of the year. Ducati on the back foot, Aprilia really taking a stranglehold of this championship to the surprise of everybody.
Yeah, we've seen in previous years Aprilia at hotter circuits, at stop-and-go circuits. It had been a bit of a weakness for them, but a clear show of strength in that first Grand Prix weekend of the season. Bezzecchi winning that Grand Prix from start to finish. Ralph Fernandez also joining him on the podium on that particular weekend. And I think that was what was striking. It wasn't just Marco Bezzecchi continuing his form for the end of last season. The Aprilias as a collective were ganging up on Marc Marquez.
Yeah, absolutely. Jorge Martin in particular as well, having missed all of the Sepang test, 3 out of the 5 days of pre-season testing. We know how vital they are, but despite that, we're still up there, picking up some pretty impressive results and banking what would turn out to be vital points in the World Championship. For Aprilia, questions were starting to be asked, as we sometimes see at the start of MotoGP World Championships, whether this was just a freak circuits we don't go to very often, that in difficult, different conditions, whether they were able to take full advantage. When we got back to Europe, was that the point when Ducati started to take a step and started to close the gap? But once again, we got back to Europe and we got back to circuits that everybody in the paddock knew, and that superiority was still there for the Nuale factory.
Yeah, Marco Bezzecchi's dominance in winning the first 3 Grand Prix, having led every lap, wasn't quite reflected at this stage in the World Championship situation, because of course he crashed out of the lead of the sprint in Buriram, crashed out of a podium position in the sprint in Austin, Texas. And I guess the challenge of Jorge Martin was a key talking point in this early stage of the season too. Of course, Martin missing the first pre-season test in Kuala Lumpur, didn't go to Sepang. We first saw him on that factory Aprilia this season in Buriram. And the final lap charge on the medium rear tyre to win the sprint in Austin, Texas, a moment that Jorge Martin, however this 2026 season ultimately pans out, will treasure for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a remarkable charge to eventually get the better of his old title rival, Pecco Bagnaia, who himself was desperate to try and get a victory, to try and show some of that pre-season promise that we're all speaking about. But Martin had quickly gone into 2024 mode, where he saw him so brilliantly win the World Championship. The key that year consistency. On a Saturday, on a Sunday, collecting as many points as possible, which couldn't be said for Marco Bezzecchi, despite the fact that he'd set a new record by leading over 100 straight MotoGP laps on a Sunday. You mentioned the fact he was having big issues in the sprint, and that's why the World Championship lead wasn't anywhere near as big as it should have been. There was a key area of concern, a key area of work for Marco Bezzecchi, whereas Jorge Martin was Mr. Consistent, building up those points, and after Austin was able to, just for one day at least, take control of the MotoGP World Championship to the shock of everyone.
Yeah, they exchanged the World Championship lead across that Austin weekend. We were still waiting, even though they were 1 and 2 in the championship, for the first genuine heavyweight head-to-head between Marco Bezzecchi and Jorge Martin at Le Mans. Boy, did we get it.
Yes, absolutely. Jorge Martin, despite coming through from row 4 of the grid, 10th on the grid he was on that day, he did it on Saturday after one of the great MotoGP moves. It was unbelievable, rolling around the outside of Marc Marquez, Marco Bezzecchi and Pecco Bagnaia, and we all said, surely there is no chance that he can go and repeat that the following day. That first corner move, no. He had to settle for 8th, 9th in those opening stages, and we all thought that it was going to be once again Marco Bezzecchi's day. But his charge through the field to take that French Grand Prix victory, and with it the World Championship lead once again, was something quite special. On that moment we're thinking, well, Jorge Martin, having missed most of pre-season, having built his way into this season, surely he's now the favourite for the World Championship. And Jorge Martin at that moment became the second favourite for the World Championship. There's a running theme here. We get quite a few in the opening half of the season.
And of course, having come so close in Austin, Texas to locking out the podium for the first time in MotoGP, only mechanical problems denying Ayagura a podium finish there. He and they weren't going to be denied at the French Grand Prix as Agura came through to 3rd place to make it the first ever Noali, Aprilia all lock out of the podium. The first moment where we genuinely started to see Ayagura plant his flag and show just what a contender he could be.
Absolutely. Ayagura should have had a podium if it wasn't for a late technical failure in Austin, and took full control and full advantage in Le Mans, once again showcasing that there are very few riders better than him at the closing stages of a MotoGP race. And that Sunday night in Le Mans, it felt like a moment where Aprilia had full control on the World Championship. Not only had they locked out the podium, not only were they quite comfortably clear in the World Championship from a rider's perspective and a Constructors' Championship, but Marc Marquez, having crashed out on Saturday and told the world that he was going for surgery on his shoulder, that felt like a moment where the championship was surely going to be only going in one direction. How wrong we were.
Yes, the winds of change, it felt at this point, were blowing through MotoGP. Aprilia in an incredible start to the season, winning 5 of the first 6 Grand Prix. Of course, sprint victories for Jorge Martin in Le Mans and in Austin. It looked at this stage as if Aprilia would have the World Championship battle all to themselves. After a 7th MotoGP world title was sewn up in such emotional fashion at Motegi last year, Marc Marquez came into 2026 as the red-hot title favourite, although there was a question mark surrounding Marc, of course, the way his 2025 season ended with the injury sustained in Indonesia, and it became very clear from very early on that we weren't looking at a Marc Marquez at the peak of his powers.
Yes, we all came into the season, as you rightly say, expecting Marc Marquez to be the Marc Marquez of 2025, wrapping up the World Championship with such ease, so comfortably, so early at the Japanese Grand Prix. But I don't think any of us expected just how much of an effect that crash 1 week later at the Indonesian Grand Prix was going to have on him at the start of 2026. As you rightly say, we weren't seeing that explosive nature that Marc Marquez had in 2025. We most importantly weren't seeing the consistency that we're seeing from Marc Marquez in 2025. Yes, there were some highlights. Victory in the sprint in Brazil, before then finishing on the podium just 24 hours later. But the key moment, I think, for all of us is arriving in Austin, a stronghold for Marc Marquez, a place where he's been named the King of COTA on so many occasions. And from the early laps, we quickly understood that something wasn't right here. We're not going to see Marc Marquez be crowned King of COTA once again. He just doesn't have any kind of rhythm, any kind of feeling. Something is really wrong. But as is always the case with Marc Marquez, so close-knit with his camp, we weren't really getting any indication as to why.
No, we were often seeing Marc Marquez being beaten up badly in the first half of Grand Prix. We saw the Aprilias ganging up on him in Buriram. We saw Pecco Bagnaia, Fabio Gianantonio, amongst others, really sticking it to Marc Marquez in the early stages at his beloved Austin, Texas. And we were seeing mistakes from Marc Marquez. You can argue that he was responsible, albeit a very freakish retirement in Buriram when he runs over the curb, the tyre off the rim. Of course, he takes Fabio Gianantonio out of the sprint in Austin, Texas too. And I think the one that really stands out to me is in Jerez, with Alex Marquez, his younger brother, leading the Grand Prix. Marc tried to go with him and crashed trying.
That was the key one for Marc Marquez, because at that moment, we all then got an understanding of what Marc Marquez's mind wanted to do. His body wasn't allowing him. Clearly, he was still feeling some real after effects from that right shoulder injury from what was now upwards of 6 months ago. He wasn't able to go out and do the things that he had been just 12 months prior. And he himself would later admit that it was that Jerez crash, it was that Jerez weekend where he had to go and find some answers to work out whether this was just Marc Marquez coming to an end of his MotoGP career, which a lot of people were starting to ask the question, is this the decline of Marc Marquez? Is this going to be the final years of Marc Marquez in MotoGP? So he went to get some answers to try and work out exactly what was happening.
Yeah, the French Grand Prix came next, and it was at this point where the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle were finally starting to be put together in terms of Marc Marquez, just how he was feeling physically. Marc Marquez crashing out of the Tissot sprint on the Saturday when he was running in the sort of tail end of the points positions in the end. Now, he broke his foot in that crash in the French Grand Prix sprint, but on a day which began with a magic lap in qualifying one, which showed us that the magic was still there for Marc Marquez, the injury to his foot brought forward a surgery that would just lay bare just truly how much Marc Marquez was struggling.
It was a big crash. I mean, not very high speed, but a big one. And yeah, unlucky I broke my. You need to help me for the name. The small finger on the
Metatarsal.
And yeah, I broke the fifth metatarsal. It's not a very big injury, but you know, arrived in the correct time, because already before here we planned to have a surgery after Catalonia in my right shoulder, because I was working hard these first races at home, and for some reason after Jerez I realized that something was not working well, and then I went to the doctors and I say something is going on here, because I'm at home, I'm feeling okay, I'm riding motocross, I'm feeling okay, and I arrived there, I'm riding MotoGP bike, and I feel the right arm destroyed. Something is going on, and then with a deep analysis, they understand that after Indonesia crash, they fix everything, but another injury I had with the screw was broken and the other one was bent. The one broken, the position was a bit different. And then that makes that on a MotoGP position, that screw is touching the nerve, the radial nerve. And then for that reason I was fast in some times. I don't know how, I don't know why. But I was not constant and arrived at strange crashes. And for that reason also this weekend I was extra careful to try to survive. But yeah, you know, the body is not following what I want, and I need to take a rest.
What does this mean for the future? What do the next weeks, the next months now look like?
I mean, when you hurt shoulder, looks you can think that it will be a long recovery, but will be not like this. I mean, in the end, it's open the shoulder, of course, take out the screw, but they say that should be okay in a short time. But you know, no, I don't want to fix a date. For sure, Catalonia will not race, and then we will understand step by step for Mugello.
And just finally, what does this mean for the championship fight this year? It's obviously going to have a huge impact on your defence.
Yeah, I already told to you that I was not ready to fight for the championship. I knew, and I don't say nothing because I don't like to cry in front of microphones, but just I try to work in my garage, try to work in myself, try to convince myself, but when you have a physical problem, you have a physical problem, you cannot do it anything, and it's there where I need to to take a rest. As I showed today in the Q1, I can be fast, yeah, because I know how to ride these bikes, but as I showed today also, I can have a stupid mistakes without knowing what's going on, because when something is touching the nerve, the arm is not following what you want to do.
All the best with recovery, Marc. We look forward to seeing you back as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Marc Marquez then was an injured spectator in Barcelona. He would return to action at Ducati's home Grand Prix, the Italian Grand Prix at Mugello, but it became clear that Mugello wasn't Ducati's house anymore as Aprilia launched a takeover at the Italian Grand Prix. Marco Bezzecchi leading home Jorge Martin, Pecco Bagnaia just denying Aprilia another lockout of the podium, and at this stage Marco Bezzecchi is 102 points clear of Marc Marquez, who was fighting a good fight with Pedro Acosta in that Italian Grand Prix. Certainly entertained us, but Aprilia once again laying their cards on the table, very nearly locking out the podium once again at Ducati's home of all homes.
Yeah, Mugello always a key weekend for so many reasons. The Italian Grand Prix, the home Grand Prix of both Ducati and Aprilia, who at this point, the championship picture becoming a lot clearer that they were going to go head-to-head for top honours in 2026. But it was a statement victory by Marco Bezzecchi, his first in MotoGP on home soil. Such an outburst of emotion afterwards, showed everybody how much that moment meant to him. Without doubt, the best moment, the greatest moment of his career so far. And you felt as though a moment like that, to have celebrated with the home crowd as he did, was surely going to be a springboard for him up and towards the halfway point of the season. Confidence could not have been higher at both Marco Bezzecchi and within the Aprilia camp, as well as Ducati tried to find yet more answers to try and stop which up to this point had been an absolute steam train that Aprilia were rolling through the MotoGP World Championship.
Yeah, Pecco Bagnaia leading the early stages of that Italian Grand Prix and fighting hard in that midpoint with Marco Bezzecchi, ultimately plummeting very nearly behind Iagura altogether. Aprilia, as mentioned, very nearly locking out the podium. Marco Bezzecchi, the high of the first part of his 2026 season, and of course, without the knowledge of what was to come next, he looked a champion in waiting at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. He was able to take all of the weight of expectation, all of the pressure of that weekend, and channel that energy into something positive, which is the true mark of a champion. He delivered when he knew he had to, when he wanted to most. And I think everybody at that point were asking pretty genuine and quite rightful questions of who's going to stop Marco Bezzecchi in 2026. If he continues to ride at this level, he's going to be a very difficult man to stop. It is still worth adding, though, that Bez was still searching for that first Saturday success. Once again, that was his Achilles heel, and that was the small error that he was making weekend after weekend that allowed his rivals to just about remain in touching distance.
Yeah, Ralph Fernandez, the sprint winner in Mugello, as we'll discuss later on, he and the Trackhouse team were becoming a bit of a thorn in the side of their factory squad. Marco Bezzecchi at this stage then 102 points clear of Marc Marquez, but as far as the first half of the season is concerned, he wouldn't score a point again. So Aprilia were in a seriously strong position at around the 1/3 point in the season, but we can't necessarily say that the atmosphere within the quartet of Aprilia riders was totally harmonious, because at the Catalan Grand Prix, ultimately won by a Ducati in the form of Fabio Di Giannantonio, saw the first signs of friction within the Aprilia camp. Jorge Martin and Ralph Fernandez coming together in the early stages of this Sunday Grand Prix. This was, of course, the third start in that Catalan Grand Prix, and Jorge Martin ultimately getting angry and ultimately physical with his own team.
Yes, it was quite remarkable, really. The Aprilia, who up until that point were in absolute dreamland. They were leading the Constructors' Championship, leading the Riders' Championship. They quite obviously had the best motorcycle in MotoGP. But that was the first time that cracks started to show, and then genuine questions were starting to be asked of, were Aprilia ready for the pressure cooker environment of fighting for a MotoGP World Championship? Aside from Jorge Martin and his crew chief Daniele Romagnoli, nobody in the Aprilia camp had ever fought for and subsequently won a MotoGP crown. And was that lack of experience going to start to show? You mentioned the coming together between Ralph Fernandez and Jorge Martin. That then resulted in Massimo Rivola in front of the world's media, in front of the world's cameras, walking down to Davide Brivio and wagging his finger in the face of the Trackhouse box, which really surprised everyone that they would make such a public showing of that. And then the big moment, Jorge Martin coming back into the box and pushing Paolo Bonora. Clearly his emotions getting the better of him. An action that he would very, very quickly afterwards apologise for and hold his hands up. But it was those key moments that started to show that Aprilia, if they wanted to fight for the World Championship, as their riders, as the team bosses would start to say, they had to work together.
Yeah, Aprilia leading all 3 championships at this stage, but perhaps just coming to the realisation of what they're on the verge of achieving at this stage. Pressure being brought from within. How much of that pressure was brought on themselves, and how much of that pressure was brought upon by the clear improvement, as we return to Europe, from Ducati?
Ducati had made technical advancements. Their 2026 aero package was a step forward and allowed them to get closer and at least put a little bit of pressure on Aprilia. But a lot of the errors, a lot of Aprilia's implosion over the last 4 or 5 Grand Prix was down to themselves. They brought all 4 riders together famously for a meeting in Mugello where Paolo Bonora told us that the message was clear: total respect. Then, just 2 weeks later, at the Hungarian Grand Prix, Jorge Martin makes a huge mistake, crashing at the opening corner on the opening lap and took out both Marco Bezzecchi, the championship leader at that time, and Raul Fernandez as well, which would lead to the Aprilia boss, Massimo Rivola, coming and speaking to the media and making some extremely strong claims.
I spoke to Jorge very, very quickly. I'm just listening more than speaking, really. He was apologizing with everybody, but still it's difficult to digest. A world champion, I think, he cannot do a mistake like that, but it's done.
Marco Bezzecchi, though, was still in relative control of the World Championship at this stage, and relatively in control of his own emotions in Brno. Boy, did the sky start to fall in.
Yes, he was still leading the World Championship, still in control, but in the background, a double victory for Marc Marquez. Ducati starting to build some momentum, would certainly turn the screw ever so slightly. And then after yet another failure to score any points on a Saturday in the Tissot Sprint in Brno, Bez striking a trackside marshal in scenes that we haven't ever really seen before in MotoGP. A shocking incident, and as a result was excluded, was banned from the race on Sunday. Just yet another example of the pressure of a MotoGP World Championship getting to both Marco Bezzecchi and Aprilia. And Marc Marquez, as he so often does, seeing an opportunity and grabbing it, seizing it with both hands. Back-to-back Sunday wins for the reigning world champion, as he really started to tell the world that he was back in the fight.
Yeah, back in the fight and back to winning ways. Back-to-back victories for Marc Marquez in Hungary and in Czechia. And Marco Bezzecchi then went to a circuit that has certainly favoured him in the past. You'd say it's favoured Aprilia in the past as well, a circuit in the TT Circuit Assen that certainly would appear to suit the RSGP. And it did suit them. They locked out the podium, but perhaps crucially, Marco Bezzecchi was the odd one out, missing out in a place on the podium ultimately. And another sucker punch for Marco Bezzecchi, crashing out at the Ramshoek on lap 2 as his downward spiral began to gather pace.
Yeah, a mistake that Massimo Rivola said was purely down to Marco Bezzecchi himself. He was too fast, trying to gain too much time on Marc Marquez in front of him in the early stages of that Dutch Grand Prix. And you quickly at that moment felt that suddenly the tide had turned in MotoGP, because Marc Marquez, in the blink of an eye, had gone to within 40 points of the World Championship lead. Aprilia were dominant in Assen, as you rightly say, a new star born as Ayagura became Japan's first winner in MotoGP for upwards of 20 years. But their star man at the start of the season, their star man going into the campaign, was really starting to see the championship slip through his fingers.
Yeah, Marc Marquez was able to ride in safe mode to a couple of top 7 finishes at the TT Circuit Assen and lose nothing in the World Championship, which could ultimately prove to be a real turning point as we get into the second half of this season. And unfortunately for Marco Bezzecchi, arriving at the Sachsenring to complete the first half of the season, if he was in hope of a change of fortunes, that wasn't what he got.
Yeah, quite remarkable that 102 points he was clear of Marc Marquez after he'd just taken victory in Mugello. Now, at the conclusion of the German Grand Prix here, he finds himself behind Marc Marquez in the championship standings, 22 adrift of Jorge Martin, following a crash on Saturday morning in qualifying at the German Grand Prix, leaving him with a broken collarbone. And as a result, you would have to say that the summer break comes at the right time for Marco Bezzecchi. A roller coaster start to the season. At one point, the clear favourite for the championship, now out of form, out of luck, and needing this break to really reset and try find some of that feeling that he had in the opening parts of 2026.
And down to 4th place in the World Championship. Of course, across the Dutch TT weekend and that crash at turn 15, Jorge Martin seized the World Championship lead. Aiguero with his 2nd place to Marc Marquez at the Sachsenring, moving up into 2nd place. So Aprilia with 3 riders in the top 4 in the World Championship, but pressure building down in Nawale. Hopes were high from the Japanese manufacturers of a renaissance in 2026. And starting with Honda, it was clear at the start of the season that Honda had made improvements with their motorcycle, but when you look at it in relative terms to the rest of the field, the improvement wasn't big enough.
Yeah, finished 2025 with a couple of podiums courtesy of Joan Mir, and there was a feeling that potentially they, on occasion, could take the fight to Ducati and Aprilia that were so obviously going to be the benchmark. But with the steps that both of the Italian factories were able to make, Honda had found themselves almost in no man's land, unable to really get into the podium fight at any of the Grand Prix, and just trying to pick up the pieces of top 5, top 6 finishes when mistakes were made in front of them. You would have to say, though, the one bright spark, the one real standout for Honda has been the emergence of Brazilian rookie Diogo Moreira. Took his time in the opening rounds to find his feet, but certainly as we went through rounds 5, 6, 7 and onwards, Moreira quickly became the standout Honda rider week in, week out. It's clear that they have done a brilliant job at emerging what will no doubt be a future superstar in MotoGP.
Yeah, Joan Mir took a podium that he ultimately wasn't allowed to keep at the Catalan Grand Prix. More gravel traps than checkered flags for him. As far as Yamaha are concerned, we didn't really know what to expect or whether to have any expectations at all for Yamaha, with a brand new package, a brand new concept for them, switching across from the inline 4 to the V4. And before we even arrived at the starting line for the first Grand Prix this season, it looked as if Fabio Quartararo's patience had snapped.
Yeah, it has been a very, very challenging opening half of 2026 for Yamaha. No real magic moments to speak of, apart from Fabio Quartararo doing Fabio Quartararo things and somehow managing to get himself into Q2 on a couple of occasions. They are lacking so much power with that new V4 engine that they just cannot get into the fight. They cannot be competitive. And as you rightly say, patience was wearing thin with Fabio Quartararo. It quickly became apparent that he wasn't going to be sticking around with Yamaha in 2027. And as a result, the motivation, the desire to push himself and his body to the limits every weekend was not there. Yamaha had to make a big change to try and find a step, to try and reclaim that MotoGP glory, but it's a long, long road ahead. That opening half of 2026, a tough one for everyone in blue.
Yeah, steep challenge for rookie Toprak Razgatlioglu this season. Have been signs of progress, but unfortunately those signs have been largely towards the back of the grid. But potentially brighter times ahead for Yamaha with a heavyweight lineup signed up for 2027. It's easy to forget that the first World Championship leader of 2026 was Pedro Acosta on the factory KTM after that dramatic, entertaining and slightly controversial Tissot sprint to kick off the season, which got tongues wagging in Buriram. Acosta versus Marc Marquez. Boy, is that a rivalry that's going to run over the next few years. How much of this is KTM improving their bike and how much of this is Pedro Acosta carrying the factory on his back?
Very much down to the talent of Pedro Acosta. We could see throughout pre-season, and then the picture became ever clearer in the opening half of 2026. The KTM machine had obvious limitations. It wasn't a race-winning motorcycle, but time and time again, Pedro Acosta was able to drag it into race-winning potential. His talent is obvious. Now in his 3rd MotoGP season, he is still waiting for that MotoGP victory. It will come, there is no doubt about that, but the frustration for Acosta is unfortunately he doesn't have a bike beneath him at this current moment that is able to get him into that position.
And unfortunately for Pedro Acosta, too often a stage this season, he's had a bike underneath him that hasn't run properly. KTM's season has had its highlights. Of course, Pedro Acosta has put them onto the podium on a couple of occasions, most notably in Austin, Texas, when he was challenging the factory Aprilias. But KTM's sort of second part of the season, or second part of this first half, has been blighted by unreliability.
As they tried to find the limits, tried to push that RC16 to the very edge to see if they could get Pedro Acosta in a more competitive position. Unfortunately, they pushed too far. There were technical difficulties, most notably in Barcelona, then again in Brno, throughout the weekend at the Dutch Grand Prix in Assen as well. Obvious frustration from Pedro Acosta, who just couldn't see a checkered flag through absolutely no fault of his own.
Yeah, and the most obvious example of that, of course, that Catalan Grand Prix, the terrifying incident involving Marc Marquez. It felt for much of that afternoon, it was a very dramatic afternoon in Barcelona, that perhaps Pedro Acosta's name was on that trophy, but ultimately in a shortened Grand Prix, his hopes once again turning to dust.
He's had lots of opportunities in Buriram, in Barcelona, in Hungary, and every single time Pedro Acosta has either found someone or something too good for him. A great shame for Acosta, but time and time again we have stood here on After the Flag and said that Pedro Acosta has absolutely maximised everything from his weekends, and I think his talent is what has put him right at the top of so many people's shopping lists for 2027.
And it's Ducati who have secured his signature for next season, a complete clear out for next season, it would appear, for KTM across their factory team and Tech 3 as a new era begins for the Austrian manufacturer. Yeah, the 2026 season has been a classic on the track, but there's been plenty going on behind the scenes off track too, Jack. It feels like the toing and froing, the jockeying around to have the best possible rider lineup for 2027 has been as entertaining as the action out there on track.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to be honest, being a pit lane reporter in the opening half of the year has been a lot of fun. 2027, a huge year, as I'm sure you all know. Brand new regulations coming in, brand new tyres as well. It's a clean slate for everybody, and as a result, it has resulted in the most explosive rider market in recent memory. We started the season with only 2 confirmations, as you can see here. Johann Zarco to be sticking around in the LCR Honda squad, and on the eve of the new season, Aprilia confirms that Marco Bezzecchi will be staying with them.
Ducati, it felt, hold all the cards. There was a bit of a domino effect that went on as we went through the early months of the season. Many of these actually before a wheel was even turned at the start of the season. Ducati clearly in a big position of strength.
It was rumoured for a very long time and then confirmed that the reigning world champion, Marc Marquez, would be staying in red for another couple of years. A move that didn't really surprise anybody, but who his teammate would be surprised everyone. Ducati going out and signing one of the top talents in Pedro Acosta. Acosta next year will be making the switch from orange to red to make up one of the strongest MotoGP lineups in recent memory.
A rider who we thought was going to be an ever-present for the rest of his career at Ducati, a rider who we thought was made for Ducati, Pecco Bagnaia, the one on the outside looking in. What did that mean for him?
Well, as soon as he knew that his future didn't lie at Ducati, he had a number of suitors. In fact, Aprilia, Honda and Yamaha were all in negotiations with Pecco Bagnaia. But in the end, it was Aprilia that managed to secure the signing of Pecco Bagnaia on a 4-year deal as well. A huge statement of intent from both Bagnaia and Aprilia as the best mates team up in Aprilia for 2027.
There was a major scramble to secure factory seats for 2027. The next factory to announce their plans for next season were Yamaha.
In a really difficult moment in 2026 with Yamaha, and we wondered as a result whether that may well weaken them in the rider market. In fact, quite the opposite. They were able to capture Jorge Martin, of course, already a MotoGP world champion, and team him up with his Aprilia counterpart, Ai Ogura. The pair of them now go into the summer break, first and second in the World Championship. The pair of them heading to Yamaha next year.
Yeah, if you're Maya Meregali, Paolo Pavesio and the top price at Yamaha, you'll be quite enjoying the way this 2026 World Championship battle is developing. KTM also looking to try and put themselves in the best possible position for next season, having lost Pedro Acosta to the factory Ducati squad, and they also acted quickly.
They did indeed. Pit Byra's been honest with us and said it was always going to be a challenge to replace someone with the talent of Pedro Acosta. They've done a pretty good job in doing so. Marc Marquez and Fabio Di Giannantonio bring MotoGP race winning experience. Alex now 30 and Didier at 28. They've got two riders at the peak of their powers in the best moment of their MotoGP careers, hoping to try and push KTM towards title glory in 27.
Honda yet to announce their factory team, although we're pretty confident how that's going to look.
Yes, the main man rumoured to be there is Fabio Quartararo. We know for sure he's out of Yamaha, given the fact that they've announced both of their signings. It looks as though Quartararo is absolutely going to be moving across to Honda in 2027.
Yeah, who partners him remains to be seen. One of the contenders here, David Alonso, the Moto2 frontrunner. It looked as if he was guaranteed almost at the start of the season to take his place, but a young rookie in Honda colours has made their decision a little more difficult.
Yeah, Diogo Moreira, we know, has a Honda contract. We just don't know for which team just yet. Moreira, we thought was going to be LCR bound for another year, but his performances have put him in the picture to potentially be in the factory squads. But Alonso won't be the only rookie. It sounds as though we're going to have close to 5 Moto2 graduates next year, which is going to be a fascinating Rookie of the Year fight.
Including one up here, Danny Holgado, who of course is fighting at the very front of the Moto2 class with Aspar at the moment, a winner in the class, and he's going to have a world champion alongside him.
Yeah, Joan Mir confirmed to be making the same move that Alex Marquez did and Marc Marquez did, hoping to reignite, rejuvenate his MotoGP career with a move from Honda to Gresini.
VR46, well, they've not confirmed what they're doing for next season, although they have confirmed which bikes they're going to be running, which by process of elimination leads us to pretty confidently predict that Fermin Aldeguer will be in their colours next year.
Yes, they will once again be the factory-supported Ducati outfit, meaning that Fermin Aldeguer, still on a Ducati contract, will be moving to Valentino Rossi squad next year. And it seems as though a man that has really been grabbing headlines in the World Superbike paddock, Nicolo Bulega, will be his teammate.
Yeah, Luca Marini, a name who we'll come on to in a shortly as we go through the rest of the independent teams. LCR, it's going to be one of David Alonso and Diogo Moreira. There is no bad option there as far as Honda are concerned. So that leaves us with Trackhouse Tech 3. Trackhouse Aprilia, that's suddenly become a very lucrative seat, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and as a result, they were out shopping. A number of riders were linked, but it seems as though they have come down on a decision. The first one, Enea Bastianini, who will be moving on from the Tech 3 concern and linking up with the Trackhouse squad. And then there are a lot of talk throughout the opening half of the season that Ralph Fernandez potentially could be out of a job, but he used all of that motivation, all of that pressure into results, and as a result it does sound as though Ralph Fernandez's performances on track have been rewarded and he will be sticking around in Trackhouse next year.
Tech 3 then, KTM, run of course by Gunther Steiner. There were questions earlier on in the season as to whether they were going to stay with KTM. There were rumours of potentially moving to Honda for next season. KTM they do stay with, and it looks as if they want a blend of youth and in the form of Luca Marini experience.
Yep, Luca Marini looks likely to be moving across to Tech 3 KTM, and then the fight to be alongside him, it's been confirmed to us by Gunther Steiner, will be a rookie. The two names that have been continually linked, the man currently leading the Moto2 World Championship, Manu Gonzalez, and his teammate, the young Australian Senna Agius. We'll have to wait and see who wins that fight.
So one of two, either Gonzalez or Agius. Looks like he's going to be taking that particular place. Of course, we've got David Alonso and Diogo Moreira. For the moment, we'll put David Alonso at LCR. That appears to be the way the wind is blowing in that particular story, with Diogo Moreira taking the place alongside Fabio Quartararo at the factory team, which leaves Pramac. And we know Toprak Razgatlioglu has a contract for next season, and with Yamaha's factory team confirmed, it looks as if he's going to be staying at Pramac. And another rookie joining him, it would appear.
Yeah, the fifth one. What an exciting grid we're going to have for 2027. Ethan Guevara, who himself is still in Moto2 title contention, a race winner this year as well, and as a result, he's earned himself a promotion from the Yamaha-supported Pramac Moto2 squad to Pramac MotoGP squad.
So we're hedging our bets a little bit here with the second Tech 3 rider, because it appears it's a bit of a coin flip there for Gunther Steiner. But the 2027 grid beginning to take shape, and if we're anything like correct with how this is going to pan out, then 2027 should be another classic. 65 points then cover the top 8 riders from Jorge Martin down to two-time world champion Pecco Bagnaia. Realistically, Jack, as we head into the second half of the season, how many title contenders do we have on our hands?
It's a good question. I think you are naturally drawn to that top 5, only 24 points splitting them. I think all 5 of those riders will feel that they have a genuine chance in the second half of the year of at least competing for the MotoGP World Championship. I think one name stands out given the fact he's won 3 of the last 4 going into the summer break. Marc Marquez back to full fitness, back to his very best form, and now only 18 adrift of the championship leads. You would feel that his rivals all feel that he is the man to watch at this current moment. But with Marc, you just know that that body of his physical condition still isn't at 100%, and as a result there is a question mark there. You do feel that just one small mistake and one injury could be the difference in the championship this year. Consistency throughout all of the contenders hasn't really been there. If someone can find that in the second half of the year, it's going to put them in a really good position.
Marc Marquez made a very interesting point on the eve of the German Grand Prix weekend at the Sachsenring in the Thursday press conference. He said Marco Bezzecchi has been the fastest rider so far this season, but Jorge Martin has done the best job because he leads the World Championship. It's going to be much more than just pure raw speed that wins this World Championship. What are going to be the deciding factors?
Consistency, as we mentioned, and the ability to take full advantage of weekends when either you as a rider or the motorcycle has a clear step on everybody else. Just to take as an example, Assen, the penultimate round of this first half of the year, the Aprilia, obviously the bike to be on. That was a weekend where Ayagura took full advantage and was able to maximise his points with a second place in the sprint and a victory in the Grand Prix. Then 2 weeks later, you come to the Sachsenring, a place where Ducati and Marc Marquez, of course, had an advantage, and Marc was able to take full profit of it with a 37-point haul. When you get to a venue where you feel comfortable, where the bike is strong, you have to take full advantage. Mistakes in those moments are going to hurt you the most.
Thanks for joining us, Jack. 5 riders then, covered by 24 points as we head into the second half of this season. We have the underdog for VR46, Fabio Di Gianantonio. Can he take the number 1 potentially to KTM next season? We have a wounded Marco Bezzecchi looking to rediscover the form that took him into the championship lead at the very start. We have a resurgent Marc Marquez looking to take an 8th MotoGP crown. Few would be brave enough to write him off. We have the almost stealthy Ayagura, who is now a MotoGP winner and clearly immune to pressure, but leading it into the second half of the season, it is the Martinator looking for a second World Championship in the last 3 years. The second instalment starts at Silverstone on the second weekend of August. This golden MotoGP season continues.